One.
Chris, the topic we will be discussing today is an interesting one. How do you run computer/hacking sequences that are exciting and don't bog the game down for other players?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an unusually specific question that seemed cool, I think, when we came up with it, and I guess we'll see what happens when we try to discuss it. So.
Yes. Hello, and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rowe.
And this week we are joined by James Pozenel.
Hi, I'm James.
Hey, James. Thanks for coming on. So we got connected to you through a mutual friend, and you and I, well, let's say this. You had emailed, you'd emailed me, and then I dropped off for like a year or so. But then we managed to connect at the Ann Arbor Public Library out here. Did a game design expo a couple weeks ago, which was super fun. So they had a bunch of like, local Southeast Michigan game designers showing up there, and you had a booth there, which is great. So yeah, I guess why don't you tell us all about yourself and like kind of your history with gaming, and I guess like what you're publishing these days.
All right, cool. So I'm James Pozenel. I am by day I'm a computer guy doing computer things, and then by night I take my laptop and I write. So I'm an author. I self-publish. I also recently became like a regular freelance contributor to Goodman Games, who publishes Dungeon Crawl Classics and Mutant Crawl Classics and Lankmar and Dying Earth. They just released that box set for the Kickstarter.
Sorry to interrupt. I just got my gigantic Dying Earth Kickstarter box in the mail.
Oh, you did?
It's amazing.
It's a ludicrous amount of stuff. Yeah.
The boxes are like super thick. I've never even seen a box like that. They're like offered like on the edges and everything. It's like amazing.
I don't know if you followed that one or not, but there was so much stuff that it came in 2 box sets instead of 1. So,
yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt, James. Carry on. You were telling us.
It's to gush about that project is definitely deserved, because it's an amazing amount of stuff, and I got to write for it too, which was
nice.
Wow, fantastic. Can you share a little bit about what was your writing role in it?
Yeah, so they had the Kickstarter and everything was done. They really did have like the first boxes that had been in play development for like a few years, several years, I think. And after the Kickstarter, they had a bunch of stretch goals. So there was like a manse, a bunch of magician manses. I wrote one. There were some demons and otherworldly entities. Kind of wrote up one of those. Got to write up some spells. Got to write up a curse. A bunch of stuff in the Kickstarter only package. I don't know, 5,000 words or 10,000 words. I can't remember how much.
That's super cool. Yeah. So it sounds like that was like kind of an established connection you had with them.
Well, I started as the community of DCC is fantastic because it's just like, welcome, do whatever you like, and people will support you, which is, not every game system is like that the actual fans are like, treat third-party content with as much, they love it just as much as the stuff that's coming from the company, right?
Yeah.
And so I just started writing third-party content, and I've been writing. I think I was just noting that it was 5 years ago I wrote my first, it's a 180-page book. That was my first book. A supplement for elves. So just been doing third-party stuff, and then eventually did it by myself, DIY, self-publishing. And, you get to know people, and then eventually they're like, we like your stuff. Could you please come and write? Could you fill in, for a little bit here?
Yeah. That's great. So did you do that? The first book you wrote, was that one of your Kickstarters, or did the Kickstarters come after that?
It was a Kickstarter. It wasn't my Kickstarter. It was a guy from Australia, David Fisher. Shinobi 27 Games is his company. And he's was an early writer, third-party writer in DCC. So he's got a bunch of stuff that he was writing, including the predecessor to the book. So I wrote like a volume 2, and he has a volume 1, kind of like the same topics, which is patrons, like developing these patrons in DCC. And so I just kind of said, like a whisper from the internet, like, let me write a book for you. And like, I'm from America. You should totally let me do this.
Please take pity on me.
And he's like, you can do it yourself, And I was like, no, I'm nervous. I never did this before. So that was the first one. It was his Kickstarter. But I think my first solo Kickstarter was House of the Red Doors, which was my first adventure that I self-published.
Cool. And is most of the stuff you've done for DCC or MCC?
Yeah, I'm a big rabid convert to DCC.
I'd like to hear more about that, actually. I mean, if you're into old school gaming, you are spoiled for great choices right now. I'm curious, so why is DCC the one that is great for you?
It was about 7 years ago, I was playing 3.5, and anybody who's played that, it's just there's a lot of mechanics, right? If you develop an adventure, there's just a ton of mechanics that you are able to kind of bring into the system, and the players are too, right? Like their builds for their characters are like a game in itself, right? And then the GMs on the other side of that doing the exact same, in opposition, building these adventures, right? Using all the mechanics, it all has to kind of like mathematically work and be balanced and all this other stuff. And that's a way to do things. I got really tired of like the armorer and the weaponsmith, kind of dynamic of how that system works, essentially, right? Players build better characters. The dungeon master has to answer in kind. With the adventures, right? So I said, "That's it. It's over. We're not playing it. No more. Please no." And tomorrow we're rolling up new characters, and basically in this kind of like last stages of the 3.5 campaign, I was like, I need a different system. I need to play something else, and I don't want to go back to AD&D or BX or whatever. I don't want to rehash all that stuff. So I was really looking for something that fit, and like the vibes were like the vibes I want, and in total, like flying in the face of having to do tons of prep, right? Like 3.5 requires tons of prep or written out stuff or whatever you want to do. And I like making my own stuff. Everybody does, don't they? I mean, it's fun to run the adventures, but it's also fun to like sandbox your campaign and get it from point A to point B, right? Maybe you got those things in the center, but you got to go from, I don't know, the Temple of Elemental Evil to Barrier Peaks or whatever it's got to be, right?
Yeah.
And so I was looking at, was it Adventurer, Conqueror, King? And then I was also looking at maybe another system, and then DCC. And I was just like, this is perfect, because it was a die 20 system. So we used a lot of SRD kind of components, but then layers on like just some crazy town stuff, especially like spells. So the spells, everybody, the caster rolls to see what kind of effect they generate, right? And so the table for invisibility covers like the spells in D&D of invisibility all the way to like mass improved invisibility, right? It just depends how high you roll on the chart.
Yeah.
And so there's one spell instead of like, I don't know, in D&D there's like 4 or 5 for invisibility, something like that. So that was a cool component. Plus, casters can fail and crazy stuff can happen. Like it can blow up, or they can like become kind of mutated by the magic they're wielding. And then patrons was another really awesome thing. It was like casters kind of form these relationships with these supernatural entities, and so you have kind of a good questing mechanism, move stories along. That the past patrons could essentially ask for, make demands of their of the characters, and in exchange they're kind of given special powers or different spells or that kind of stuff. And so those two things combined are awesome. Plus, it's just really loose. Like there's Mighty Deeds, which is like every single feat is available to a fighter. Mm-hmm. They just have to roll high on a deed die. It's a separate die roll that they roll with their attack. There's just so many cool parts about it that was just like, this is just open, right? To like, there's not a lot of rules, not a lot of mechanics. There's like a handful. And then you just play it at the table. You rule it at the table. You know, you just kind of make your decisions. But and the really brilliant part about the book is there's no rules, but there's tons of examples of ways you can rule something, right? And so if you really are, kind of read it cover to cover, which at this point is kind of a freelance writer and writer in general in this system, I have kind of explored lots of nooks and crannies of the book. And it's like, there's so much in here. It's like, it took all the stuff out of 3.5 and just kind of sprinkled it out through the book. Right. And then you can use it or not use it.
I've played and read through the DCC rulebook, but it cracks me up almost every time I pick it up and flip through it. I land on a page I swear I have not seen before. And there is a little bit of that feel of that first edition Dungeon Master's Guide that you had, where every time you opened it, you were on some weird table you don't remember seeing before. But I wanted to say I think patrons are, if I were to pick one thing from DCC that really hit me, is patrons, because I felt like it solved two challenges that like fantasy RPGs have. One is that there's this like rich history, and I guess I'm mostly talking about Elric, but not only Elric, of people, with difficult relationships with, deities and patron entities and stuff. And, how do you do that in D&D? I know that there's been stabs at kind of warlocks who have patrons and stuff, but it's not nearly as fleshed out. And then it also just kind of helps with this more general problem of how you be like a cleric or someone who is ostensibly serving a deity in this fantasy world, but also going on adventures. That's always been something that I think, at least all the games I've played in, that's either kind of the relationship with the deities either faded into the background entirely, or we've just had to kind of wrangle with what that looked like in the context of also you're exploring this dungeon. So I don't know. I thought DCC's handling of patrons was kind of secretly revolutionary.
Yeah, for sure. And what about spell dueling? Like, not to bring up another thing, but like, like the concept that all of a sudden, like the wizards can just break out and duel, like in the middle of combat.
Yeah, that's super fun. So I played in a funnel of DCC. So this was I looked it up because I always get it wrong. It's Sailors on the Starless Sea.
Oh, a brilliant adventure.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah. So our friend, our sister showed the Splat book. They just had an episode talking specifically about this funnel, just because there's so many things in it that are just brilliant. But I had an absolute blast playing it. And I know we touched like maybe 2 pages worth of the mechanics in DCC going there, right? Because it was really more about the funnel. But it definitely made me like, oh, I should take a look at this. Like, I think this is sort of what I'm after when I want to play in this mode of storytelling.
Yeah.
With this, kind of grungy, kind of metal, hack and slash adventure.
For sure, right? Like it's a lot of fun at the table. Everyone's laughing, right? Even when you're failing, you're laughing because it's like something dumb happens, you fumbled and then all of a sudden you're on the floor or like, whatever. I think I had like a cat swarm and it fumbled and I said, they all just start fighting each other. And then the swarm disperses, right? Like that was their fumble, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of creativity, like inherently. You can do anything you want, like at the table. You don't have to trudge through the rule set.
So James, could we talk about, I want to hear what you're working on right now, like if you're willing to share, but I also had a question. You just had a book come out called Cats of Rotblue. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yep.
It's for DCC. Is that right?
It's for DCC. It's a first level adventure. It's zine size. It takes a lot of Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith kind of stories and kind of like plays with them. So there's lots of kind of references to Lovecraft and specifically like ghouls and mythos ghouls, not D&D ghouls.
Yeah, well, I had a specific question about that because you see Clark Ashton Smith, he gets name checked a lot in this type of fantasy game, but I always feel like Lovecraft usually kind of gets the top billing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, could you share with us, like, what does it mean? What does drawing inspiration from Clark Ashton Smith look like compared to, say, drawing inspiration from Lovecraft or Howard?
That's an essay question right there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
I love it,
and I didn't mean if. And you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm really intrigued. I read one collection of stories. I think Zothique is that. Again, I might be pronouncing that wrong. Years ago, I really enjoyed it from Smith, and there is this sense of like he's kind of this side presence in the hobby that, and I don't know. So I'm curious. You cited him specifically as inspiration, so
yeah. He's great. I mean, he kind of like straddles a line between like what Lovecraft is doing and like getting closer to like horror in essence, right? Like there's a lot of like terrible things in the stories that he writes. An island of zombies where the magic user has died and there's kind of like it's still carrying on and he arrives on shore. Also the Averonia series, like they're in France, or like a version of France where there's this these terrible things happening in the Middle Ages. So he has a really wide, like casts a wide kind of set of topics, right? Like Zothique is one thing, right? And then there's just he's got so many different kind of cycles of stories that he kind of does, and he was like an autodidact. He like read the dictionary basically. And he so he's using all this language too. He's like just really rich use of language in the stories, so and that's attractive as well. But he just he's got just a little different take. Like Howard is very great action scenes, mighty thews. I mean, some good, like, terrible monsters and that kind of stuff. And Lovecraft is always kind of like that cosmic horror and just kind of like, and some sort of like inevitability that you're just going to, you're going to go mad or die or whatever. But Clark Ashton Smith is just this really, kind of these horror vignettes, that kind of, and he's got so many stories. It's just crazy. I have like Amazon has like a Kindle, 133 Weird Tales stories. I'm not even finished with it. I mean, maybe halfway through the book. It's like 4,000, I don't know, phone pages or whatever. But you get the idea.
Yeah.
But he was always like, he was in their orbit, and it's just, I think he's forgotten largely because he didn't appear on Appendix N.
Interesting. Is it fair to say, this is a years old memory of reading the Zothique stories. So Lovecraft's Dreamlands have never really connected with me. And I felt my memory of reading Smith is that it felt like a slightly more grounded Dreamlands. It's fantastic, but a little less, well, I guess a little less dreamlike. Is that a fair way to describe it or not really?
I think there's something to that. There's episodes, right, where the character's kind of in modern times, for then, and then all of a sudden they transition into this, cosmic, kind of feels like they have left the planet, really, right? Like they've gone somewhere completely different. There's always, I don't know, there's something really spacey about the vibes that he gives off in the stories, in that Zothique cycle, especially. Like, I don't know if we just teleported to another planet or what, but that's kind of like the feeling I get from it. And that's way different than, what Lovecraft was usually doing with that. With Dreamlands, it's always like, you don't know really where you are, right? Like Panath or Kadeth or wherever you're going, you have a sense that you've traveled through realms, but where they are, I don't know. Under the earth, somewhere on earth, like above earth, I don't know.
That's interesting. You're selling me on reading something by Smith quite a bit. Yeah, because every time I've tried to read like Lovecraft, I'm just like, I don't really have like a concrete sense of what's happening. I know it's part of like the experience of it too.
Yes.
But yeah, it's something that just always sort of bugged me. It's like I don't know. Like yeah, like maybe my imagination is not good enough to read Lovecraft effectively.
He's got a different vibe too. His voice is way different because he's like he read like lots of Edgar Allan Poe and lots of stuff from the late 19th century, and that's kind of like the literary style he pulls from when he's writing all his stories. H.P. Lovecraft, and others, don't have that same exposure and voice in their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about cats, and then if you've got something else you're working on,
yes.
Can you tell us about that too?
Yeah. So Cats is this homage to these guys that we were just talking about, Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, and also Husker Du, who I adore.
Nice.
So there's a song like how to skin a cat, and it's about like a cat fur farm, and you're feeding the rats to the cats and the cats to the rats, and so that's kind of forms the basis of the adventure.
I love it.
But all reversed from the standpoint of the mythos ghouls who need to eat flesh, dead flesh, and so it's really about getting humans so that they can get find ways to lure humans so they get the human meat and let's get the cycle going and so it's really dumb, but
no, I read through it a little bit. I kind of skimmed through it just before we got on the call, and there's some really fun images in there.
I think it vacillates between kind of like a little bit of Scooby-Doo and then just something really crazy and horrible.
Yeah.
That's great. And is that's at Drive-Thru RPG, right? Is it also in print?
Yep, have it in print. Goodman Games, their store will carry it online. Okay. I usually manage to get copies into like Vault of Midnight.
Cool.
So, and I have stuff down there right now, I'm sure. But if you're interested, there's copies of all my stuff.
That's great.
At Vault of Midnight. I got to get them to pick up the Cats, though. That just came out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And my other big project is, and it relates to our topic, haha.
Yes, perfect.
Is net crawl, which is, if dungeon crawl classics, it's like everything you can think of. There's a crawl version of it, essentially. So there's like Western, and there's like space, and there's it just goes on and on. People just keep on using the system as a springboard to make their own settings and games, and so. Me too, in a way, but it's net crawl, and it's kind of like Tron going inside the computer to do the adventuring, versus our topic, which is how do you do skill? How do you hack into a computer? How do you make that fun, right? And so that's usually a skill check, or like there's a specialist character, that thiefy kind of character who can get you around the computer systems, and this says nope. We're all going to go in. Every character goes in to the net, like Tron, and you have a big cyber dungeon adventure instead. Get what you need, and then you can go back out to the real space again and continue, the adventure.
Is the assumption that you're adding this on to a campaign you're already running, that you want to add like a kind of a Tron, Matrix type world to it, or am I understanding you wrong?
It can be that. And I think I've been working on it for about a year, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 2 now, on this project. And originally it was kind of like, it's a sidecar, cyber, net sidecar to whatever game you're playing right now. So that could be like Cyberpunk, or that could be MCC, or that could be, a space like Traveler or Mothership, or it doesn't even matter, right? It's just like, if there's a computer, you can use this setting as a way to adventure, do computer stuff that's not just skill rolling.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, and this has been part of the discovery, is like, how do you package this up so that people can kind of understand it and use it, and maybe not everyone wants to use it the same way. So I think there's like a handful of books. There's like kind of the base idea of being inside the computer. And that's just, it could be you're just telling stories about living inside the computer, like humanity's all just kind of plugged in, and that's where the stories are now online, right? And it's not so much about the meat space anymore. Yeah. But another book kind of handles the another version of the game, or like an add-on to the game, is how do you reconcile two games together, right? Like a meat space game and a in computer game. So I think it can kind of go a couple different ways. Is basically my take on it.
That's fascinating.
Well, this rolls right into our topic, so I want to move on to that. But before we do, so when can we expect to see? Will this be coming out? If you know, and how would we go about getting it when it does?
So Netcrawl is currently, I'm doing a Patreon, which is kind of a fascinating experience. But I'm on Patreon, kind of releasing bits and pieces every month, and that's patreon.com/lectrotext. We can add it to the notes or something.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
And then, and so my plan right now is, probably next year is, and I'll do a crowdfunding for it.
Nice.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for walking through all of that stuff with us, James. Shall we kind of officially? This has been fantastic so far. Yeah. Let's officially move into the topic, and let me provide a little bit of context for this one, because I think I came up with this question. So the topic lurking behind this question, this is a specific incarnation of a broader question, which is kind of like, what do you do when one character has kind of a thing that they do that unless you take some effort to change this, kind of just mostly stars them, and it's important to the plot and the setting or whatever. And so, I have in my mind, cyberpunk games that I feel I would love to hear otherwise, but I have yet to see a cyberpunk game that really nails this experience. But there's other ways in which this happens. Wizards can travel to a different plane or something like that, or spaceship pilots can be the only ones making rolls in a a long space battle or something. Right. So happy to talk specifically about the idea of kind of hacking computers, but that is the larger, like, kind of lurking question I had when I came up with this. So I don't know. Does one of you guys want to start by talking about a time when you bumped into this in a real game?
Yeah. I can start. I mean, the obvious answer is, right, just Shadowrun 2nd Edition. Nailed it and move on. Yeah. No, I did play in a game of Shadowrun 2nd Edition at the last Roll for TopicCon that Tim Saucer ran it. And there was one person who hacked into something at one point, and it did feel like this totally separate, like, he's making this big roll, and it was super cool, and I'm glad he got to do it. And like, I kind of wish we had been able to do some other stuff along with it. It's interesting because I think there's like this, especially with hacking, there's this mystique around it. Like when someone says hacking, like, everybody has a vision of what that means. I think if you're a programmer, you're like, oh geez, like, yeah, like, but if you're not, right, you're like, oh, I'm thinking about CSI, like someone, like two people at the computer, like hacking into a mainframe, or, like, I don't know, whatever, pick your favorite media. Yeah. What was that?
Guy with a hoodie,
Yes. Yeah, like Mr. Robot, like walking along the pier, like, yeah. Yeah, and so, I mean, I think there's that part of it where it feels like it's something that you have to specialize in doing. Like, maybe it's like, like you were saying, Andy, like a pilot character, right? Like, it's something that you can't just have everyone participate in, so it has to be this special case. It sounds like, James, like you're trying to work towards, let's not make it a special case. Let's make it something that everybody can do.
Yeah. It's you read the books, right? Cyberpunk books, like the Neuromancer series, fantastic books, awesome books, right? Like, why wouldn't I want to play that? And but he has the advantage, right? He's controlling the narrative, and he can go from chapter meat space chapter to cyberspace chapter, and you're not left hanging, right?
Yeah.
You're not like waiting for the cyber. Well, you can be pretty excited about one side or the other, right? Like that's another really interesting. He's building anticipation. He's stopping the narrative right when it's getting good, and then he like plops you into a different one just to kind of mess with you.
Right? Yeah.
But regardless of that, he has the power, and you are totally your agency is to read, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that at a table, it really sucks.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, now we're going to stop everything, and this person's going to take like 15 to 30 minutes to figure out this thing, and everyone's like starts looking down at their phones,
Mm-hmm.
or like, you know, going to the refrigerator or whatever it takes. They're no longer invested in the story because they're out of it.
Yeah.
And it's a bad experience at the table. And first experience was like Cyberpunk 2020, right? Like the beginning of the genre for gaming, and you're like, it happens. It just all of a sudden the edge runner has to do this thing, and everybody just sits and waits until it's over. And same could be said, like you were just pointing out, is like it happens in lots of parts of the game, like the thief. All of a sudden, right? There's a trap. Now he's got to just roll, and everybody watches. Those are usually mercifully short, right? Those detect trap and find trap rolls. But you know, hacking can be way more involved, right? And people, you know, to your point, Chris, like make it into something that maybe it's not really at all. Because when you like see what that involves professionally, it's like a lot of programs are just kind of running by themselves, and you know, there's even that's not a ton of interaction.
Yeah. It is like, I mean, I think the thief with the traps is a good one, because I know like running those scenarios as a GM, it's always been really fun for me, because it's like in the thief, it's like, well, you know, I check for, you know, traps or whatever. It's like, well, maybe there wasn't a trap there, but let's kind of go with it, right? So getting to invent this like clever trap on the fly that they get to disarm and stuff, right? I think is a really fun back and forth that I can think can happen in those moments that maybe doesn't happen with other mechanics in a lot of games. Right, when it's really more like okay, like this is some variation on you swinging your sword, right? Like you're swinging your sword or you're shooting your arrow, something like that. But like a trap, it's like, oh, like, let's be clever about it. I think the same thing can happen with those hacking sequences, is you almost like turn on a different part of your brain as a GM in the traditional like hacking scene. I don't know exactly why that is, but that's just something I've noticed when I've been running games.
I'm right now kind of in the middle of writing an adventure for this system, and even that's kind of like, you know, you're starting to think about the architecture of a shipboard computer system, which sounds like ludicrous to make into an adventure, but here I am making servers and like, you know, firewalls and all this stuff. Because you're going to have to step up against them, right? Like everyone's going to go in and have to deal with moving through this space in order to get to some quest objective. And God, I hope it's going to be fun. Like that's like the fear of all this, right? Like here's this alternative. Does it suck?
I'm sure it'll be good. I guess so. Like let's flip this a little bit. Like, let's talk about like, okay, how could you make one of these setups interesting for everybody at the table? Right. Like, so like, again, in like sort of the trap scenario, like an obvious one for me is like, right, like you have some sort of trap that can't be disarmed by one person, right? So you have to have kind of collaboration in order to, you know, to solve the trap. Like maybe there's a switch plate someone has to step on, someone else has to pull a lever, right? So you can kind of get other players involved that way. But is there more you could do with hacking other than let's all watch him stack up his D6s?
Well, I'd throw out there, you know, if they've taken the trouble to protect this information, there can be, you know, things like physical defenses in the room, right? That could force all the players who are acting, waiting to interact with that trouble, right? So it could be. I mean, I think this is the typical thing, right? Guards bust in, right, and a firefight breaks out, and I guess that kind of keeps it exciting. But you're kind of going back and forth.
Chris, I'm intrigued by when you were talking about a trap, and you talked about sort of this back and forth kind of mutual challenge and creativity that the player and the GM kind of engage in as you are fleshing out how this trap works, like on the fly and in response to what the player says they're attempting to do or what they're checking out. I don't know, like I don't think I'd really want this in most games, but for whatever reason, hacking feels to me like like a good setup for like a mini game of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to like bust out a deck of cards or something. You know, like there's something about the like at least in our kind of popular fictional idea of what hacking looks like. This idea that one side is kind of playing their hand and the other side is reacting with a kind of counter strike. And I don't know. I think I wouldn't want. I think it would be dumb if the game had to stop every time in your Cyberpunk game you tried to hack something and you all had to stop and play a different game in the middle of it. But you know, it just makes me think about like some kind of a kind of collaborative, like a quick collaborative like mini game where maybe one person is taking the lead, but everybody else has something they can play or do to impact it. You know,
that's actually
Why not? I like the idea of the card deck. I like the idea of like putting the card, you know, some of the opponent's card deck in the hands of the players. Like, it's something that's kind of programmed, right? There's nothing set about how it should be strategized with, as far as like from the game master's perspective of like it has to play out in a certain way. It's kind of like loose, right? Like here's some things that happen. Let them deal the cards and act as the opponent.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I like, right, you should just kind of pause and play Netrunner. It's like that card game is super good. I don't know if either of you have played
I know of it, and it's out of print.
Yeah, it's out of print. Like it's great, right? Like, so if you can somehow track down a super expensive copy on eBay or, you know, whatever. But
that's it. You've heard our official recommendation is buy an expensive out of print game and play it instead of your role playing game. Yeah.
Look, if you're listening to this podcast, you have many abandoned CCGs in your closet, so don't even act like this is a problem. So, yeah, but like I mean that game does a really good job of kind of this asymmetrical play, which I think like that's sort of what we're getting at with like when we're talking about hacking is like you have your opponent or your GM, right, whatever, has like the corporation's card, right? Like so they have like sort of defenses that you don't because you have all these sort of attacks that are going on. Yeah, and I think I really do like that idea of like using some sort of like physical manifestation of that, like, well, I'm just gonna type on the computer real fast. I think would be pretty fun at the table. Yeah, and then like James, like what you're saying, like the guards burst in, right? Like so if you've got your meat shield character, they've got something to do. You know, they're tossing goons around left and right while someone else is trying to break in.
I think it'd be fascinating to also add in, you know, the Matrix, like, you know, Kenu's getting beat up and he's like convulsing on the table.
Yes.
Whatever. Like there's something for like that healer type person to kind of be involved in too, right? It's like you know, hoping to stabilize him or maybe like assists, you know, from other technical characters or medical characters to.
Yeah.
That is such an effective like storytelling technique. I get so tense. Like I know watching The Matrix specifically, but any movie where someone is off doing something while another character, you know, while time just ticks away is such a stressful, in a good way, viewing experience.
And so put them in a role, right? Of like, you have your friend's like life in your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe the players outside, you know, can take actions. It's on them to determine how much time the hacker has to get the job done, you know, like maybe there's some other things. I wanted to mention, I like James. I like the idea of kind of sidestepping this a little bit by having everybody participate in basically one big hack together. And it makes me, in a lot of genre films, like take Star Wars. I mean, there is this trope in Star Wars that some characters are like, you know, really good at flying spaceships, you know, so whatever, Luke Skywalker is really good. But the reality is, if everyone in that movie can pop into an X-Wing and fly it and shoot down TIE fighters if the story needs it. So I sometimes wonder, you know, like when you think of a cyberpunk type setting, you know, do we need a hacker archetype? You know, do we need a hacker in a cyberpunk world? Or it seems like a little redundant or something. Why not just say that everyone has this baseline ability to hack stuff?
Right.
I don't know.
Like some could be better at it, right? Like higher bonuses or dice or whatever the mechanics are that are involved. and then or potentially, and this kind of gets goes cross grain to everybody doing stuff, and is in fact something that kind of the current version of Cyberpunk does, is like the net person has more actions than everybody else. They have like so there's like AR is kind of like the way they deal with it. It's less about jacking in and more about like there's an AR and you like look at and that's like the video games like this too, right? Mm-hmm. You look up at the camera and you kind of do this hack, right, to turn it off.
Yeah.
So you have like 4 of these actions that they can take in a virtual reality or augmented reality. But I think that kind of like all of a sudden that person's making 4 rolls in a round, and the street samurai is just making 1 attack, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So when thinking about this on like a really practical level, so let's say you're running a game and for whatever reason that the hacker has to make rolls and it's going to take 15 minutes to resolve. I'm curious, do you guys just accept that and say, all right, it's the hacker and I are going to hash this out, everyone go get a snack? Or do you try to put in those like little scene breaks? Okay, now we're going to cut back. I'm curious what you guys do.
Scene breaks. Yeah, there's always got to be. I think there's a sense for me that like pacing is pretty important when you're running games, and like anything you can do to sort of break it up and share the spotlight around the table, I think is really useful. Unless you have someone who just needs to check out mentally or emotionally for whatever reason. But like, yeah, like I mean, I think like there's no reason to be like, okay, let's roll and then roll again, right? Like just bounce between people as it's happening. The other like quick thing that I wanted to say with this, like I think you could probably like just not do the roll for a lot of hacking stuff unless it is something where you can involve the rest of the party in some other way. So if it is just going to be like a one-on-one, computer versus hacker setup, it's like, well, I mean, if they have sort of infinite time and they're all by themselves, like just, don't do the roll. But like if there is some sort of other thing that you can bring into the scenario, maybe that's your cue to give the party something to do along with the hacking.
I feel like at least a lot of the older Cyberpunk games I've read have tried to make hacking interesting by making it like a multi-step process with lots of rolls. And I think this is what James, you were kind of getting at earlier, where one character suddenly is making like 8 rolls and everybody on their turn and everybody else is making 1. I feel like that's an understandable, but maybe a wrong way to make something more interesting is to make it more convoluted. Why not just have a single D20 resolve the hack in this way? A single D20 resolves your attack, right?
Right. Like I said, like the thief experience is like usually mercifully short, right? Like there's just a couple rolls and it's over and everybody goes back to, exploring the rest of the dungeon.
Yeah.
And so that feels tolerable as an experience. But I think you're dead on, Andy. Is like they've kind of contrived to bring this concept as like a playable like mini game or whatever that kind of happens because it's cyberpunk, right? You go inside the computer, there's servers, there's ice, there's firewalls, and you have to defeat all them in order to get to the stuff. And maybe that's not an appropriate design at all.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I think we're coming up on our time.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give, is there anything kind of on this topic, or I guess on any other topic that you've been holding on to that you guys want to share before we wrap up the chat?
I'm hoping, I think the NetHack thing, it feels totally new, which is, as an idea. Like I was really looking and I really just couldn't find anything that was going to say, okay, everybody just goes in.
Yeah.
And I otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. I think it's like, this is such not a dumb idea. It's fun, and to get a new experience, to design something that's new, like the setting basically is like a whole RPG game. I did not want to do that necessarily at the beginning of this, but like you get to this point where you're like, I want this game, and it doesn't exist.
Yeah, you're gonna have to make it.
You're gonna have to make it.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it. Like the the Patreon helps motivate me to continue working on the content. Like I have a schedule, stuff has to come out, and then and at the same time it's growing, right? Like so, it's all kind of working together to get to the place. But I'm really excited about the idea.
So on my brief skim through it, this will be my wrap up, my final thing. I promise that my brief skim through it, I was struck by the really, really quirky kind of character classes. Do you have like a favorite class to design that you could share with us?
So far, I really like the idea of the war driver, which he's like slots in like pre-configured like combat chips, for lack of kind of programs that allow him to excel like in a particular style of combat. So it could be range combat, it could be melee combat, it could be blades, it could be blunt weapons, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
And so I really like that concept that like this, the user has simplified their interactions with the computer to just be like, I'm about like doing damage and having these kind of specialized chips and using them. It plays off the Mighty Deeds in DCC, and I really adore that concept. And so that class getting kind of to do the same thing here is a lot of fun. And writing up those chips are also kind of fun too.
Do you use the kind of spell casting framework for a lot of the stuff, or not necessarily?
Yeah, there's kind of two frameworks for casting, and so one of them is in Dying Earth that we were talking about. The magician memorizes in the Vankian D&D style a spell. He has it as a certain spell check level. The spell's always the same every time he casts it, and they run out, just like D&D, in the spell slots. And so that mechanic now exists in Dying Earth. I've leveraged it here in this game, especially for the hacker. He can run spells, programs at a certain kind of like predetermined outcome. But then I also use the Dungeon Crawl Classics, the random table, right, with results that can improve with higher rolls. Yeah, and that's for like the guy who's wild. He's just in the net and he can just manipulate it at will. Kind of, he's changing the variables on the fly as the code's running, as it were. So I use both. Yeah. And I think they work well together. Like the paradigms make sense.
They both fit a certain kind of archetype idea from the genre. So I should have asked those questions at the beginning of the show, not at the end of it. But okay. I promised I would be done saying things, and I will stop. So anything else?
I was just going to call out. So there is a just absolutely lovely table about entry level software in this in this book. It's just full of like phrases just make me smile. So like decryption brute. There's a banhammer.
Yes. Chainmail. That's one of my favorites.
The datagram stuff you have in here too, like the names of some of these, like hash smash.
I had a ton of fun, taking the profession and just playing around with the words.
Yes,
and kind of making them into stuff. I think that was definitely the bestiary is like that too, right? Where you just are looking through all the monster, all the ice, and there's tons of just computer. I'm having fun with computer stuff.
Yeah, that's so great.
That is
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, all right. Well, we'll drop links to the Patreon and all sorts of stuff in the show notes for this one. But yeah, thank you, James, for coming on. This was just a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it.
I'm so glad we got to connect and to talk about and the dice came up magically, and and all the stuff. It just is kismet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super good. And
well, thank you for confronting Chris at the game event.
All right. Well, I'm going to do a quick wrap up and then we can say goodbye. So this has been Roll for Topic. We're part of the Roll for It Media Podcasting Network. Our sister show, The Splat Book with John Corey and Kyle Latino, is wonderful. If you liked this conversation, you would love the conversation they had a couple episodes ago about Dungeon Crawl Classics, specifically the Sailors on the Starless Sea episode. It's really good. They just kind of go through and highlight the stuff that they enjoy about that adventure. And if you get to the end of that and you're not like hooked on the idea of running it, I don't know what's wrong with you. So go listen to it. It's super fun, and if you get a chance to play in it, for sure playing it. So
modern classic.
I think that does it for us. So yeah, again, thank you, James. I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your player's having fun, you're a great GM.